We've been asking this question along the way. Who is Jesus and why he still matters? The second one's a statement. I understand that. But let's phrase it as a question and say, why does Jesus still matter? And so we've been looking at these different descriptors of who Jesus is, utilizing the Gospels, the book of Hebrews, other texts throughout the New Testament, and even some in the Old, to help us understand what Jesus is all about. And today, we focus in on what it means that Jesus is our friend. It's hard for me to have a conversation about friendship, number one, because it feels a little hokey to say, Jesus is my friend. Who's your best friend? Jesus. Jesus is my best friend. It feels pretty hokey, but what I hope to do as part of this is to dig deeper into what it means that we have a friend in God. This would be the last time I summarize the weeks before because we're going to get a little far into it, but the first week we talked about Jesus as the Son of God and the Son of Mary and Joseph. And what that means, that Jesus is the exact representation of God, yet he took on flesh so that he might, in our life, speak to us words of comfort, of love, and of nearness. And so we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that as part of God's nearness in our time today. The week after that, which was last week, we talked about Jesus as the teacher and how Jesus came to fulfill the law. And ultimately, he summarized the law into the two commandments to love God and to love our neighbor. And so we're going to continue in asking that question. And as Angela read for us, out of the Gospel of John. Now, I want to help us see where the Gospel of John and 14 through 17 really fit with us today. And ultimately, this is what they call the farewell discourse. Jesus is talking to his disciples, and they are on the road to Calvary in the sense that they are almost to or right at the Passion Week. And so this would be around the Lord's Supper, and Jesus is directly talking to the disciples for all three of these chapters, 14, 15, 16, 17. Sorry, 4 of these chapters. In chapter 17, there's an incredibly beautiful prayer that Jesus is praying for his disciples, and then throughout the rest, there's some direct teachings and some different things going on. Now, for us, as we recognize that though this isn't a direct teaching to us, because we weren't one of the original disciples, because of our tradition and because of our connection to the disciples as followers of Jesus today, we take that and make this as a teaching that has a direct impact on us. And so I don't want to reread all of it, but I do want to reread at least a portion of this. Verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command. And then moving on to verse 15. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends, for everything that I learned from you, everything I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. So Jesus is redefining the relationship. And it's important for us to make sure that we don't get too far into this, where it's like it's not like we're chummy with Jesus in the sense that we have equalized the conversation between God and us in the sense that, now we have become God-like, but instead what we recognize is that Jesus came in the flesh and his nearness is defining us no longer as servants but as friends. Now, what are the factors that drive this part of our friendship with Jesus? Well, as we read in 14, you are my friends if you do what I command. And then in verse 15, Jesus says that you're my friends because you know what my master's business is. So those are the two things that are important, is that obedience in connection to also what we talked about last week, if you were a part of that, is that there's still an expectation to do what Jesus commanded. That's what friendship is a part of. But beyond that is that we are aware of the ultimate work of Jesus Christ as part of his time on life. Okay, so let's look at Jesus as our friend. I've been fortunate to have, over the course of my life, an incredible friend group. Just a bunch of incredible people that have loved me well. And I'm just going to send through some slideshows of my people here. This is my grandmother, Mamu. I just wanted to make sure she got in there because she's one of my best friends. You'll see here in a minute tons of people that maybe you're familiar with. But I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have as many great friends as I have. And I know that many of you share in that story, and some of you don't. What I would say to you is that my life, where I am today, the path of my dogs are also my best friends, in case they're actually like my closest friends. They listen really well. They don't talk back. They're very lazy, which I appreciate. But for me, is like I recognize that my friends over the course of my life had truly shaped who I am. Like I am a result of the grace of God in my life, but also the grace of God that has presented itself in the people I've been blessed to be in relationship with. And I could take two people that were raised in a similar background, similar experience, and I could tell you based on the friends that they kept, what their ultimate life journey would look like, how difficult things could be, because friends can lift us up, but friends can also tear us down. We've talked a lot about that, especially when we talk about community. So what does it mean that Jesus is our friend? Well, thinking about my friend circle, and I know I feel an immense amount of pressure because there's a lot of people that are in here that I would also consider my friends that maybe didn't make the TV screen, and that's only because I don't have a picture with you, and so I will be outside waiting for a selfie for the next time. So Jesus is our friend. It made me think about a little bit of how, what is a friend? What are the qualities that you look for in a friend? I found these on a website, Psychology Today, and I thought they were pretty good. A friend is trustworthy. Somebody that can be trusted with something you say, but trustworthy. A friend is honest. A friend is dependable. A friend is loyal. A friend is empathetic. A friend is non-judgmental. A friend listens. And I want to, three more, but one of them I want to really pause on and make sure we get this. A friend is self-confident, and for me, it's personally important that a friend is funny and or fun to be around. But here's the one I want to really kind of burrow in as we really talk about Jesus as our friend. Is a friend is supportive in the good times and the bad. And the way I want to redefine this for us, this wants to become vocabulary in our own language, is that a good friend has to have what I call a show-uppedness ability. A show-uppedness, okay? So it's not a word, we're making a word, show-uppedness. Is a friend needs to show up. To show up. In the high points, a friend shows up. In the low points, a friend shows up. In the best moments of your life, in the worst moments of your life, in the moments of grief, in the moments of celebration, a best friend has to have the quality of show-uppedness. Now, I think it's important for us to hear that because I want us to see that in the context of Jesus as our friend. Jesus as our friend. Because the nearness of a friend is essential to our understanding of who Jesus is. Now, Jesus draws distinction. And we do this in our own journey too. So how many of you ever use the thing, well, like, I know of them? Like somebody, they're a Facebook friend, and they're like, hey, do you know Daryl Cates? Well, I know Daryl Cates, so it's not really fair. But for some of you, maybe like, I know of Daryl Cates. Well, you wouldn't consider Daryl a friend. You would consider maybe an acquaintance or a peer if you work in the church world. And then you even have a distinction between friend and best friend, right? And so Jesus is using this comparative language to help us see that there's an important distinction that is happening in that moment. No longer are you servants, now you're my friend. So Jesus is our friend. And this matters. And there's three reasons this matters. And I think the first one is this, is that Jesus calls and challenges us at the beginning of this passage on how we should be friends in our own world. And I want to use this language to help us understand this. I'm taking a little bit of pastoral license to kind of make this fit what I want to communicate a little bit today, which is not what I love to do, but I think it's still relevant. And it's relevant because I believe that Jesus wants to make all things new. And as part of that is that Jesus wants to renew relationships. Jesus wants to reconcile and renew relationships. What does that mean? Jesus here in verse 12, he says, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. This is my command, love each other. Jesus is expecting, especially within the community. We talked last week about the love of neighbor and how important that was, and that's kind of how we love the people outside of the doors, unconditionally love them as ourselves. But I think Jesus, if I can take some license, wants to speak a good word to us here today. Is that Jesus is saying to you, is that one of the primary ways that you can be defined as his people is the way you simply love one another. Now, what I also confess is that it's really hard to do this, even within a community of faith. And the reason is because we've built barriers. I did a deep dive this week on the Berlin Wall. 1961, the Russian side of Berlin built a wall. It's like 96 miles of wall down the middle of Berlin, separating it from east to west. And it kind of happened almost overnight, separating family and friend from one another. So think of it this way. I know that some of you who live in Edmond may not realize there is a city south of Memorial Okay, so let's pretend that we know that. So there's a city south of the Memorial, and pretend that a government came in here and said, hey, we don't like the fact that a bunch of the people that live north of north of Memorial Road are going south to work. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build a wall. And we're going to put up guard stands, and we're going to put up minefields, and we're going to put up barbed wire fences, and we're going to do what we can to make sure that the people north of Memorial can't go south of Memorial. And I know for some of you, you're like, my best friends live south of Memorial. My family lives south of Memorial. How am I supposed to get there? Over 140 people died trying to cross the Berlin Wall to go and see family, friends, or to find a new opportunity. That wall physically divided the world. It physically divided friend and family. Now, I thought about that a lot in context of what we're talking about because, as I mentioned, is that Jesus wants to make all things new. He wants to do relational reconciliation, putting brother and sister back together. And so I want to pause and ask you the question. What walls have been put up between you and somebody else this year? What wall has been created over the course of the last 12 months? What relational chasm has been forged because of the situations that you found yourself in? How many of you have severed relationships because of political ideology? Don't answer that out loud. How many of you have severed relationships because one of your friends took the coronavirus more seriously than the other friend did? That should be at least. Now let me break this down a little maybe more than just kind of those trivial surfacey things. How many of you have allowed walls to be created because of the difference in the color of skin? How many of you have allowed walls to be created in your life that divide you from somebody else because of the socioeconomic position of a person? All of these are real, and I'll be honest with you, is if we're not attentive to it, we will drift towards the place of allowing barriers to be built between us. And I'm not saying like between you and the guy you don't know or the girl you don't know, but I'm saying like between us. And what I believe when Jesus is saying this, he's saying that my command is that you love each other, is talking about friendship and love, is that Jesus is saying to you and me today is that it's time to break down those walls. It's time to eliminate the things that divide us. Paul talks about this all of the time in the gospel or in the New Testament in his epistles because Paul is dealing with this like tangibly. Jew and Gentile, both a part of this whole new creation that Jesus is working out in the early church. And the Jews are like, hey, listen, if you're going to come and be a part of this Christ thing, we need you to observe the Torah and all of the things that means. And so no more food. You have to do this thing to your body that I don't want to talk about in this morning service. There's all sorts of things you have to do if you want to follow Jesus. And in Acts 15, the church gets together and are like, actually, they can literally just come to Jesus. And they can be a part of our family. And not surprisingly, that wall that was up between Jew and Gentile was a wall that Paul and all the other disciples constantly tried to break down. And we come to this passage in the book of Ephesians. And he's writing specifically about this issue, about the dividing wall that's between the Jew and Gentile. And he says, for Jesus is our peace. In his flesh, he has made both groups into one and has broken down the dividing wall that is the hostility between us. So, blanket statement. For people of Jesus, the hostility, the wall of hostility between us should be broken. And so if you have placed a wall between you and a brother or sister, you are not living in line with the life that Jesus is calling you to live. So it's time today, Mr. Gorbachev, to tear down that wall. It's a little history jab for you. So tear down the wall. How? How do we do that? Well, Jesus gives us the blueprint. Verse 13 and 14, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if I do what I command. How do you do it? How do you reconcile? Is you lay down your life. Now, I don't pretend to assume that some of you are going to go be like, hey, I know that we have this issue between us, and so what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go die, and then we'll be okay, right? I don't pretend that that's what it is, but what I think maybe we need to hear today is like, whatever pride that is welled up inside of us that has created the division and kept the division, Jesus says, lay down your life. Lay down your life. Yeah, but that person over there was the problem, and if they come to me and apologize, maybe then I lay down your life. Jesus didn't wait for you to come to him and ask him to be crucified. God made him who knew no sin to be sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. Before we came to him, Jesus came to us and gave his life so we can be reconciled. Yet we hold on to all of these things because we want to keep the wall between us, because we feel like we've been unjustly treated. Lay down your life for your friend. I want to make sure that we at least acknowledge this as part of our time together. So you're going to have an opportunity to do communion. And you should have, hopefully, if you came through, you got some bread and some juice. And there's a few different things, and Jesus talks about this in Matthew chapter 5. He's talking about anybody who brings an offering to the table or to the temple. He says, before you bring an offering, go and reconcile your relationships between brother and sister. If you remember that somebody has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go. Be reconciled to your brother. And so here's what I want to say. Is before you break the bread and take the juice, if there's some sort of relationship chasm that's between you and somebody else, work to fix it right now. Get out your phone, text somebody. Can we go to lunch this week? Can we talk this week? Hey, I'd love to call you after church. I just want to make things right. That's one thing. The second thing is this, and I'm saying as far as the second thing of what we're talking about today, is Jesus as a friend changes everything. I want to dig into this idea right here, is the nearness of God. Jesus as a friend changes everything. I think about this a lot in the context of the Old Testament. If you remember the story of Genesis chapter 1 and 2, is God creates the heaven and the earth and all these different things. And then he creates Adam, and then he creates Eve. And they're in perfect community together. Perfect community. They're walking in the garden together, talking. So much so that whenever they fall in Genesis 3, God is walking through the garden and he's asking where they are. Where are they? Adam, Eve, where are you? Well, we hid ourselves. And the whole world changes forever. Abraham, multiple times throughout Scripture, is defined as a friend of God. There's a nearness that should be understood when we talk about our friendship with Jesus. When Jesus calls us friend, that means that Jesus is near with us. And I want to just own something. It doesn't always feel that way. But that doesn't mean that Jesus is any further off. The Psalms, I've been trying to walk through the Psalms as part of my time of prayer this year, and it's just a slow process. But I came across Psalm 23 just the other day, and this is a psalm like many of you should be familiar with if you're familiar at all with much of the Scripture. It's a common funeral Scripture, but I want to read this. I'm reading it out of the NRSV, and most of you will know the King James Version. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He takes me to lush pastures. He leads me to refreshing waters. He restores my strength. He leads me down the right paths for the sake of his reputation. Even when I must walk, hear this, even when I must walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff reassure me. And most of you, as you're hearing that, you start to recite it in the language that was normal for you. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For what? One more time, a little louder. I will fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. David, and trust me, David understood all of the complexities of God's nearness. Where are you, God? Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you're with me. Like, do you ever feel yourself resonating with both sides of that polar conversation? God, where are you? But you're so near to me. I just want to give you permission to say it's okay. It's okay. But I want you to dig in a little bit today, to recognize that Jesus is your friend. Jesus is the good shepherd who even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that we don't have to fear because God is with us. This isn't naive. This is an awareness of the reality of our situation and recognizing that no matter what comes our way, that God is with us. And I want to just take some time. I feel like there's a lot of optimism stirring up in a lot of our lives, and things feel more and more like they're progressing towards normal. And I mean, first service, like you all, like some of you may be new, but our first services are predominantly older crowd, and so a majority of them have been worshiping at home for the large part of the last year, and most of them have finished their regimen through the vaccination, and they're showing back up, and it's like, we're throwing like 8:30 parties. Like I was shocked this morning, like 3 or 4 people brought mimosas. It was weird. They didn't. Everybody's like, I'm going to 8:30 next week. But it's all of these friends because they recognize the sting of isolation. They recognize the difficulty of this last year. And I just want to own something. This last year has been awful. Right? We don't need to applaud that. We can. Yes, woo! I got you. This last year has been difficult on me. And even people who kind of feel like they scathed through it, like there was still loss, there was still difficulty. We have friends, people in our church that have died in the last year. People I love that I haven't been able to be at a funeral and celebrate their life yet. And I'm telling you, we're resilient, right? We're able to get up and get back up and move forward. But man, there has been heavy days, and sometimes over the last year, there's been more heavy days than easy days. Number one, I want to tell you that this is not unique in the human experience. But what I want to tell you more than that is you have a friend in God. And even though you've gone through hell this year, God is with you. His rod and his staff, they comfort you. Jesus is a friend. He's broke down the barrier that separates us from one another. He has eliminated, destroyed, abolished the barrier that separates us from God. He is with us, and that's the beauty of Jesus' story. God is with us. So whatever you're going through today, whatever baggage, heaviness, hardships, difficulty, brokenness that you're walking through today is a day where you can lay it at the feet of God and take up the closeness and nearness of Jesus' relationship with you.